Welcome to the DRF Sports Podcast, brought to you by DRF Sports. America's most trusted name in horse racing is now providing sports bettors with exclusive data, analytics, previews, videos, and expert picks on all major sports. Bet smarter and have more fun doing it. It's the DRF Sports Podcast, and now your host, Sheldon Alexander. Ready, set, bet.
This is the DRF Sports Podcast, episode 21. Make sure you like and follow wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Sheldon Alexander. And first things first, I'd like to introduce you to Cash Grab, which is DRF Sports' all-new free-to-play sports prediction game where you can win real money. It's available to every sports fan in the App Store and Google Play Store. Win real cash prizes every day, as well as a chance to win big money jackpots. All you have to do is download the free DRF Cash Grab app, create an account, and start predicting. Who will win the first quarter? How many touchdowns will Alvin Kamara score? Answering questions like these can end in you making real money. Download the DRF Cash Grab app now and win big. And hopefully we can help you win some cash here as well, as we do this twice a week. On Tuesdays, we recap the week that was, and on Fridays, it's the Picks Pod. And to be honest, I'm still trying to make some sense of what happened to the Ravens on Thursday night as they no-showed versus the underdog Dolphins, losing 22-10. Not sure what that was, but hopefully you're still getting your betting information from us here on the pod and from the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, which had yet another winning week. Make that 9 straight for our guy Scott Gramling and a 20-7 record against the spread. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your email inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. Again, the drf.com/sports for all of the insight and analysis you need each and every day. Plus, of course, we go in depth on this podcast. And part of what we also want to do on this podcast is give you some free swag. So if you want to win some DRF swag, head over to our home on Instagram at DRF Sports and enter by liking the giveaway post, following DRF Sports on Instagram, and sharing the post on your story. The winner will be announced next Wednesday, November 17th. So we've got swag for you. We've got some picks for you because it's the Friday Picks Pod. Everything from the NCAA and NFL as we try to ride the wave of the underdogs dominating in the NFL. And to do so, my guy Matt Russell joins us right about now. Well, after last week, I can't lie to you, I'm afraid to lay any points at all as the underdogs covered over 70% of the time and won outright 50% of the time in week 9. So as I cringe looking at this week's lines, I'm happy that I have this man, Mr. Matt Russell, back to talk me through the week. And I'm even happier to have you on to try and make sense of what happened to the Ravens on Thursday night as they fall 22-10 in Miami. And just an ugly, ugly game for Lamar Jackson and company. And they were favored by, I think that line closed at like 8.5 for the Ravens.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, pal. Listen, are you sure you want me? I mean, every time we have one of these Thursday night games that goes the exact opposite way of where we think it's going to go, I'm like, are we sure anybody wants my opinion on anything at this point? But that's the nature of the biz, right? Like you just go, okay, that happened. And I guess week 9 just extended all the way through Thursday. And for those of us who had Baltimore in Survivor last week, who got through by the hair on our chinny chin chin, we were sort of like, yeah, okay, I can see that happening because that wasn't the most impressive performance, certainly in the first half on Sunday. So for them to follow that up, and it's just another classic example. And I know it's very narrative-y and all of that sort of thing. You know, I think a lot of people look at me and they go, okay, this guy's very sort of by the book as far as numbers and all of that stuff is, considered. But like, it's a spot, right? Like it's just that term that we use, the spot. And it's like, yeah, a road game, short week after a really dramatic overtime, full 5 quarter, tough as nails type victory for the Ravens. Like, then they go on the road to it in a game that they're supposed to win. And like, they should have won that game, right? Like, it's not like Miami came out and was like, oh man, like we got this under control. It's like, no, it's 6-3 in the third quarter, right? It was very Jags Billsy, right? Where it's like one team is clearly better than the other team. They just don't seem to have it on this day. And that was the sort of galling thing about the Bills game last week, where it's like, what was the Bills' excuse? Right. There wasn't really any excuse coming off of not anything really, a victory over the Dolphins. And you see the Ravens, it's just like, man, it's just not working for this team. And if the Dolphins have any sort of ability here, they're going to take this game away. And that was the interesting thing in the second half was, are they going to be able to do it? Because they get to 9-3. And for those of us who have the teaser leg, we talked about it on Tuesday. And that's why I mentioned, like, why would, are you guys sure you want my opinion on anything? Is like, I talked about the teaser leg and this being this cornerstone thing where, okay, I don't want to lay the 7.5 at the time. Certainly didn't want the 8.5. Somebody out there laid the 7.5, which is why it went from 7.5 up to 8.5. So those people are in even way worse shape. But I'm like, okay, this is a really good teaser leg mathematically. I see you raising your hand. And this is a really good teaser leg mathematically. Now, does that mean it's going to get there all of the time? No, of course not. We're paying -270 for a 6-point teaser leg, right? You combine those together, turns into -115 in a 2-team parlay. So you're paying -270. What does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to need this game to hit sort of 75% of the time, right? You're going to need the Ravens to win the game 75% of the time. Now, that game, if you watched it closely, or even if you just tangentially watched it, looked like a game that even as it was played, that the Ravens would probably still win 75% of the time, right? It just happened to be this confluence of things, right? A very close call on a fumble really turned that game, because that game's 9-3 and the Ravens have the ball. And if it's, a half step shorter or Sammy Watkins goes down, maybe the Ravens end up winning that game by 1. Now, that wouldn't have helped us from a teaser leg standpoint. That would have been actually really insulting because, we were on the Ravens last week in Survivor. Once you are on that team, you are hoping that team loses the rest of the time, especially when they are playing very survivory type matchups. And I think a lot of people probably went down with the Ravens last night. So, you kind of take the good with the bad. And if you're in a survivor contest, like, my friends and I were joking last night, like, how much would you pay per person in your survivor league to get knocked out, right? Like, if you're in a really big league that has 600 people left, but there's, I don't know, say $6 million up for grabs, like, yeah, I would pay a fair amount for each and every one of those people to lose, as long as it guaranteed my safety going forward, which of course it doesn't, right? So you kind of go, okay, silver linings and all of that stuff. But all that is to say, like, a really weird night for me last night in betting. And I think it's important to sort of just mention, like, it was a losing night for me. And listen, once you make these bets, and if you know what you're doing, like, you're going to be in pretty good shape with a lot of the bets, right? You're going to, avoid some losses here and there and that sort of thing. But I'm watching, Pitt and North Carolina, and we talked about how, like, why was this line 6.5? And anybody, if you're looking at a +2.5 or a +6.5, and you have 3-4 days to sort of monitor the market, like, be patient, right? Because that reached 7 at one point on, I believe it was Tuesday, maybe even a little bit on Wednesday, where that's going to make a difference a lot of the time. And I'm not saying buy up to the 7, right? Because you don't want to pay an extra, you don't want to pay -125, -130 for that 7, because that's going to hurt your margins long term. But if you can pay attention to the lines and you have a couple of days to sort of watch and see what happens, you can get a pretty cheap +7, or you could get a pretty cheap +7 on on North Carolina. And so when Pitt wins that game in overtime, so again, we got, if you have +6.5, you're sitting pretty for a lot of that game. Maybe not necessarily the early part of that game, but you go to overtime and you go, okay, like, oh man, am I going to get screwed over here on a 7-point win? And that's what happened. But if you have the 7, if you were able to be diligent about it and grab that +7, you survive, right? You don't have that loss on the record, right? That just ends up being a push and a refund to the account, and all's well that ends well. Meanwhile, I'm watching hockey and I got 6 games going, and we end up going 2-4, and it's hockey, right? It's every game's 2-2 in the third period. And you're sitting there, is it going to go overtime? Is it going to go to a shootout? Are we going to go 0-6? Are we going to go 3-3 with a bunch of underdogs winning? Like, how is this going to go? And you just never know. And so it ends up being like a small loss in hockey. I'll push in college football after winning 2 games this week in Maction to have us go 4-0. So like we're sitting pretty as far as, what we've done so far this week. And then, of course, the NFL game, right, where there's good things happening. Mark Andrews gets a late catch to go over his prop total, if you followed that I gave out on Twitter as well. So just a lot going on. It was one of those days where, like, it started out looking like, man, this could go really, really south. And after you make the bet, it's completely out of your control, right? You're just kind of willing things to happen at that point. And it ended up being like an okay sort of low-level loss type of a night, which you need those every once in a while, because we certainly have been fortunate enough to have enough winning days and winning weeks over the last, 2.5 months or so.
Totally true. Totally true. And as we sit in week 10, we're into the double digits here in the NFL season. And there are a couple big games here that we want to talk through, which might not be our best bets, but definitely I'm going to give my pick. You're going to tell me why I'm wrong. We're going to continue flowing here. I'm doing that tongue in cheek. We're smiling in case you're not watching the video, just listening. But here's the thing, right? There's a couple big games with major storylines that we want to get to, and then we'll get to our best bets. But don't worry, we will talk you through that for sure. But let's start here. The 3-5 Seahawks and the 7-2 Packers. Packers favored by 3.5. And of course, we're anticipating that Aaron Rodgers should be back. We know that Russell Wilson will be back for the Seahawks. There's a lot of guessing and we're not really sure, but I'm going to be very honest here, and I'm just going to say that I'm taking the Seahawks because of the hook, and give me the extra half point there with the Seahawks. And also, I'm also just saying an F you to Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, listen, I'm not an immunologist, but I know the difference between the word immunization and and getting vaccinated, which maybe he doesn't, or he knows all too well. So here's the thing. I don't have like a massive play on this game, and it's sort of unfortunate because there's 2 sort of really interesting games this week. And I think what happens a lot of times, and maybe it's just a coincidence, as you get closer to the end of the year or deeper into the season, where the lines get really, really tight in the NFL in general, but certainly with the more popular, more significant games, right? Like it gets trickier to sort of find any value. You can find some value down the board here on some of these games that people aren't necessarily paying all that close attention to. But the interesting thing with the Seahawks and the Packers game is, you mentioned the quarterbacks returning, and from a line movement standpoint, I think it's really interesting because this game opened 5.5 for the Packers. Yeah. And immediately got bet down. And then it was sort of announced, Russell Wilson, of course, has to put out a video and do that sort of thirstiness type thing. And that all comes down, and the line moves down to 3.5. Like you can get a -3 out there on the Packers right now. You can get a +3.5. Like there is some disjointed opinions right now about where this line should be, but where it shouldn't be is 5.5, because we all kind of knew that Russell Wilson was coming back from this game, right? Like he made it more than clear as he's out there warming up for every game in his absence. And we knew, like, week 10 against the Packers, like that's the game that he's going to come back for. I attribute a lot of what we saw from the Seahawks before their bye in an effort to get one more win here before their guy comes back. And so just because it gets announced, like that doesn't make any sense, because like, didn't we all think Russell Wilson was going to start anyway? So like, why was that ever 5.5 in the first place? So I think that might've been an actual error by the sports books, by odds makers to sort of, leave it open to the idea that Wilson wasn't going to come back, when I guess I think we all thought that he was. So why that's interesting is, okay, this number goes down to 3.5, and that's, I think, a more fair number. My number, to be honest with you, is 4.2, whatever, right? Yeah. So it's kind of right in between. But the interesting thing is obviously that Aaron Rodgers isn't going to return to the team until Saturday. He's not allowed to do so. And so what's going to happen here, I think, is he's going to come back to the team. He's going to, presumably, test negative and be able to return to the team. And the market is going to react to that news and probably kick this number back up to 4. Maybe even 4.5, because Aaron Rodgers is back. Even though, like you mentioned, like I think we're all sitting here assuming that he's going to be back. Now, the problem is if you make that assumption now, you grab the Green Bay -3s that are out there, which is the best that's going to get. unless, of course, Aaron Rodgers doesn't test negative and he isn't able to play, in which case the line is going way off to the other side, where it's going to be Seattle favored by, I mean, listen, after watching that performance last week by Jordan Love, where do you put this line? Exactly. Yes, they covered, but can you make Seattle -3? Can you make them higher than that? Right? It's a very difficult line to make. So that's the tricky part here, right? Because right now, if you told me, okay, it's Rodgers, Wilson, everybody's, good to go here, Green Bay -3 would absolutely be my play. And if you wanted to make a small bet on that if, you're essentially betting at that point that Aaron Rodgers is able to play, I would be fine with somebody betting Green Bay -3, -110, if you can find that right now, because again, this is only going to go up if Rodgers is okay to play. If he's not, then you're going to be thrilled to have the 3.5s that are out there, the 5s that were out there earlier on this week. And so there's obviously no guarantee that he is fine and good to go. We have seen guys come back from COVID, and he actually had it, right? This wasn't a contact tracing thing or anything like that. So we've seen guys come back, and it hasn't gone very well. I don't know why. I don't know how. Again, not an immunologist or any of those other really big words that I don't know. But it just doesn't seem right when guys come back after COVID. So I completely understand you're liking Seattle here. If Aaron Rodgers comes back and this line moves it back up to 4, I probably come back in on Seattle at that point. Yeah. And so it's just a matter of, okay, what do you think is going to happen with regards to Rodgers? And that is that's the part that isn't any fun when it comes to handicapping football, having to deal with all of this second level BS stuff.
And speaking of interesting lines and potential line movements, or where it's gone, where it's coming, where it's going, all that fun stuff, we got the 5-4 Browns at the 5-4 Pats. Patriots favored by 2.5 points. And I got to be honest with you, I was a little confused when I first saw this line, but I guess people are buying in on the Pats again. And I got to say, as mentioned, I'm going to repeat this over and over again. I'm afraid to lay points this week, no matter how many points we're talking. But if you're telling me we're back believing in the Pats and it's Belichick versus Baker, I'm going to love to bet on Belichick versus Baker. No?
Okay, a couple of things here. So first and foremost, listen, we talk about it all the time, just take the points. And normally that's not a good rule, tried and true. Because as much as we think it's really hard to cover a spread in the NFL or in football in general or in, sports, normally it kind of just turns out to be 50-50, right? If you just bet the favorite or you just bet the underdog every single game, it usually comes out in over the long period of time. Problem is, NFL football season isn't a particularly long period of time. And through half of the football season here, going into last night, underdogs were 57% against the spread. Now, if you told me we were going to hit 57% this season, I'd be like, yeah, I'm into that. And turns out all we needed to do was just bet the underdog in every single game. Now, I obviously pick and choose my spots here, and I'm actually a little bit higher than 57% so far this season, 60% right now in the Circa Millions contest. Fingers crossed on that one. But the point is so it's not really a 50-50 split right now. Now, maybe things turn and we'll evaluate it at the end of the year. And if it ends up being a 50-50 split, that means that favorites are going to have their day in the second half of the season. So you kind of have to watch out for that, last night notwithstanding. As it pertains to the Browns and the Patriots, this one, I don't think anybody really sort of knows what to do here, right? Because this line opens 2.5. And I think right away, sort of the sharp money, the people who bet on Sundays when these games open up, they saw we're getting 2.5 points with the better team here in the Browns. We just talked about that last week against the Bengals. And sure enough, right, the Browns worked over the Bengals. And it's okay, this Browns team's really, really good. And I know, you keep framing it like Baker, right? But it's always the less we have to see from Baker, the better, right? And it's that's just the whole offense is based on the idea that let's throw it 20 times with Baker. Let's really pick our spots in the same way that we pick our spots with the underdogs that we back. The problem is here, right? Both of these teams kind of want to do the same thing. Ideally, they just want to run the ball back and forth. And they may just be running the ball into each other the entire time. So maybe an under is a decent look in this game. I don't know. I'm not a big totals guy. Now, what happened with regards to the line move, right, is that Nick Chubb gets ruled out. and Demetric Felton gets ruled out. And not that Felton is necessarily an important player, right? But you start getting into cluster injuries, and how is Dearness Johnson not involved in like any sort of COVID protocols? They've got to keep our eye on that. And like the Browns are like bringing in running backs probably off the street here, but we saw Dearness Johnson certainly was fine against the Broncos. Is he going to be just fine against the Patriots? Obviously, that's a bit of a different situation, right? But so you see the number go from 2.5 down to about 1 before we found out about Nick Chubb. Now, the Nick Chubb injury or issue, does like that change the line in this game? Like it probably shouldn't. But once the line goes to Patriots -1, right? Like you said, like the Belichick element, the fact that the last time that we saw the Browns play the Patriots, like it went really badly for the Browns. Like the Patriots just sort of knew everything that the Browns wanted to do. And so once you see the Patriots -1, you go, man, all they need to do is win this game. Like, yeah, let's bet on that, right? And so it's not the same people necessarily. It's different factions. So there's a faction of people who are like, yeah, give me +2.5. Maybe, you know, like that's even better than 3. Let's give me some plus money line, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a different faction of people out there that are like Patriots -1. Like I will absolutely take that. And so like, what are you asking of me? Like, how do I feel about it? Like, again, unfortunately, as a really interesting game here with 2 5-4 teams that in the AFC, it's an absolute sweepstakes for these playoff spots, right? Like you can list the teams here and it's just like a who's who. And you're like, wow, 3 of these 8 quality teams are going to make the playoffs. Like 5 of these teams aren't going to make the playoffs. So like, this is a really big game to get that sort of, you know, head and shoulders above type of thing here in the wild card race. Because obviously, you know, both these teams still have an outside chance, or at least a decent chance of winning the division. They both play the division leaders, the Ravens in the case of the Browns and the Bills in the case of Patriots. They both play them 2 more times. So this isn't the be all and end all, but a win here really helps your chances to make the playoffs here. And so, yeah, I mean, like at -1, like I would have loved the Patriots too, but now it's back up to 2.5 and we're right back where we started from. And like, I don't know, man, I don't even know what to make of this game. I will say that at 2.5, it's a really good teaser leg. Now you're saying you said that about the Ravens, and like, I still think the Ravens at -1.5 was a really good teaser leg, especially once it goes to 8.5. At 2.5, you know the rules, right? If you see a +2.5 out there, use that as a teaser leg to get up over 8.5. If this game is lined correctly and this game is going to be really close and we don't really know who's going to win this game, +8.5 as a teaser leg has to be really valuable.
For sure. No, totally makes sense. I'd like the Pats, but that's more of just my preference of riding Bill Belichick and company and what they're doing and how they're looking like the old Patriots rounding into form at this time of the season. I don't know, but that's just where I'm laying here. But let's get to some of your best bets or maybe some of your biggest leans here as we go forward. And let's start with the 5-3 Saints at the 7-2 Titans. Titans favored by 3 points here. And the Saints, here it is. The Saints lose to the Falcons last week, right? Now they're 3-point dogs in Tennessee. And I know before we were with Trick or Treat Jameis doing the zigzag with the Saints.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look up and they're 5-3. I don't know how that's happening, but at the same time, the Titans without their best player, Derrick Henry, are now 7-2. So I'm also like, wait, what's going on here? I'm not really sure which way to lean here on this one because the Titans, it's like, is this the Ewing theory, quote unquote, where they're just going to like, oh, we don't need Derrick Henry. We're good. We have old ass Adrian Peterson. Like, that doesn't make sense to me.
No.
Points,
no, listen,
points.
Listen, and listen, as much as we have, just sort of did this with the 2 games to sort of start the week here, the 2 big games, we don't do leans here, man. Once we get into the best bets, they are the best bets.
Hey, this one I was leaning. This one I was leaning. I'm asking your best bet.
I'm tipped all the way over here. And I'm tipped over on the New Orleans Saints here, +3.
Okay.
This is pretty simple for me, right? Like, for one, what do we want to do in this market, right? This highly liquid market in the NFL. It's like we want to buy low and sell high, right? And we just saw that with the Saints. We just did a really good job, and we've done it all season long. Saints are one of our best teams as far as betting on their games, not necessarily for them in every single, instance, as we faded them last week against the Falcons. but just betting on games that they're involved in. Right. And so the Titans here, a lot of people are going to look at this and go like -3. The Titans are really good. Like, look at all the teams that they've beaten recently. Right. And obviously full credit for their wins against the Bills and the Chiefs. Right. The Chiefs one starting to look a little dicier the more and more we get into this season. And the Bills one, like, that was on the back of Derrick Henry. Right. Like, it was pretty clear that they weren't going to win that game unless Derrick Henry went off. And he did go off. Now, again, he's out. They go into LA and they win that game. So it's very easy to be like, well, they don't need Derrick Henry and like, blah, blah, blah. Come on now. Your boy, Adrian Peterson, 10 carries for 29 yards, right? Like, Jeremy McNichols comes in, like, he didn't get nearly enough opportunity as he should have because for whatever reason, we're giving it to old ass Adrian Peterson. Same thing with Deontay Foreman, right? Like, those two guys should be getting more carries, and maybe they do. But the point is like, the run game wasn't going. Right. And for a team that, as much as they won that game, like, it's kind of dependent on a run game. Defensively, the defensive line was outstanding against a Rams offensive line that, frankly, can be a little bit shaky and always has been, or at least for the last couple of years after sort of the heyday of Todd Gurley running all over teams, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what do we say about the Saints all the time, right? Like, their strength is in two things, right? The offensive line doesn't get a lot of pub, but you can kind of throw anybody back there, run the Sean Payton offense. He's going to put them in decent places as far as plays and situations. And then it's just a matter of executing. But the defense, man, the defense. So if, like, they're only going to go for 2.9 yards per carry against the Rams, and as much as we like, obviously, Aaron Donald's an absolute stud here, like, the Saints defense is much better than the Rams defense. So what are we going to expect from the Titans run game? I don't expect anything out of the Titans run game. And again, they win relatively comfortably last week, but it's not like they weren't trying to score, right? It's not like they were, we get to the second half, right? The game's a little bit out of hand, but not crazily, right? They get kind of 14 free points from Matthew Stafford throwing a pick six and throwing what was just about a pick six, was basically worse than what the actual pick six looked like as he's spinning like a top doing a Carson Wentz, right? So you get that 14 free points, and maybe they get 14 free points, maybe they get 7 free points, who knows, right? But the point is if you don't have that defensive pressure from the defensive line because the Saints offensive line holds up, then you're much less likely to get those free points that they got against the Rams. And so now you're expecting the Titans offense to do something, and they couldn't do much last week. 147 yards for Tannehill passing, and we mentioned the run game. And now you get a tougher defense with the Saints here. And we're getting 3 points with a team that, frankly, listen, we don't cite a lot of advanced metrics, or we don't cite a lot of advanced metrics companies and organizations here because, listen, we want to get to the entertainment of this show. But Football Outsiders DVOA is one of the better measurements of a team's quality out there. And they have the Saints as the 8th best team in the league. Guess where they have the Titans? What do you think? What do you have the Titans as in the league? Probably top 10, right?
Yeah, that'd be an assumption. That'd be a safe assumption. Yes.
Their DVOA metric, and which takes into account the teams that they have played, has them 14th in the NFL, right? Okay. And that takes into account that they had Derrick Henry, right? That doesn't downgrade them because he's gone. That's literally just measuring what they've done so far this season on a play-to-play type of a basis. So we're getting the better team here. We're getting plus 3 points, and we're getting the Titans riding really high, a line that is as high as it ever would have been. Now, maybe if they still had Derrick Henry, would this line be higher? But we probably also like the Titans a lot more because they will be able to do what they want to do. So I think the Saints are very live to win this game. That's not crazy considering that they're only a 3-point underdog here. But I guess fundamentally the point is don't look at this game just assuming, -3, like that's way too low on this Titans team. Have you seen what they have done? Because you have to get deeper than that. And when you get deeper than that, the Saints become an incredibly valuable play here at +3, maybe even a little bit higher if everybody kind of pours in on the Titans here throughout the week, especially if Alvin Kamara gets ruled out for this game, which looks like it's quite a bit, of a possibility here. Mm-hmm. Now, again, advanced metrics, all of that sort of thing. Alvin Kamara is not having a great season this year, right? And maybe it's because of, there's no Drew Brees and like things are a little less open for him underneath. And we don't have that highlight of Kamara just shedding 10 tackles and going 60 yards, right? So his yards per carry, his yards per play isn't particularly great. So what's going to happen is he's going to get ruled out. The number is going to go up. It's going to go to 3.5, might even go to 4. And we're then going to be able to swoop in and get better than +3 if that happens. So it's a wait, right? And this is, one of these things where just like wait and see. Don't overreact to bad news. We have seen that time and time again when it comes to injuries in the NFL here. This is Saints every which way for me.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. And I like the Saints too, as well there for sure. Let's keep things rolling here with the 3-5 Vikings at the 5-3 Chargers. Chargers favored by 3 points. And as I've been following the Vikings this season, this kind of seems like a classic Viking spot where all the time, whenever I'm like, done with the Vikings, over with this team, here they come, and at least keep the game close and be frisky in a game that they probably shouldn't be frisky in. So I like the points here, but what are you saying?
Yeah, and unfortunately, a couple of different things, right? The Dalvin Cook situation, like we're not here to talk about that. Honestly, if that's the way it seems, he should probably never play again. Look,
on that note, I'll just say screw you, Adam Schefter. You're a tool. But we'll move on from there.
We are firing shots today. Listen, if he's not playing, right, like, does that matter, right? And again, like Dalvin Cook, as much as everybody like loves him in fantasy and all of that sort of thing, right? It's like, does he actually matter on a game-to-game basis when they have a run game even without him in Alexander Mattison? The answer is no, right? So if he isn't playing in this game and the line goes up, fine. I'll take the points because I'm right there with you with the Vikings here. And fundamentally here, this isn't like Kirk Cousins and Justin Herbert. This isn't anything that, or even really the Dalvin Cook situation or the Vikings running game. This is fundamentally based on what's going to happen on the outside here. Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen are going to have a field day with what's going on with the Chargers secondary. Injuries all over the board, safeties, corners, everybody just mangled, right? Like making the Eagles look like a high-powered, passing offense last week, right? Like that game for all of Justin Herbert's heroics and the fourth down calls from our guy Staley, like for all of that, right? Like the Chargers at full strength should be much better than the Eagles. Mm-hmm. At full strength, they're probably a little bit better than the Vikings, but the Vikings find a way to lose, which is always a little unnerving when you're looking to back the Vikings. On top of that, Joey Bosa didn't practice yesterday. We'll see on Friday. That's obviously a massive issue. If they can't rush the passer nor cover anybody, and those wide receivers are Thielen and Jefferson, among some other guys on that team, that's going to be a massive issue. So this is going to be the situation. And listen, we talk all the time about Staley knowing what type of a game he's in, right? He doesn't kick the field goal last week because he knows his defense is a liability. He doesn't kick the field goal last week because he knows kicking field goals for the Chargers for the last decade has been a nightmare, right? Like he knows his team. He knows the game that he's in. This is going to be the same game that happens over and over with the Chargers, where it's just an absolute shootout. And if that's the case here, I like the Vikings a lot to have Cousins, no pressure on him or very limited pressure on him, to be able to throw the ball up for his two guys here. I think are going to be running free a lot this weekend. I like the Vikings to win this game outright. The part that really bothers me is the COVID outbreak, right? Like that is a thing that could happen. This is another one where I'm waiting. Maybe public money is coming in here on the Chargers. Maybe we get a number up to 3.5 here where we can get, obviously the full 3.5 points where we would win on a late Chargers field goal. I like the money line here too, though. I like the Vikings. This is a classic Viking spot here where they disappoint against Dallas. They blow it against the Ravens. If you bet on the Vikings in either one of those games, like, yes, they covered last week, but you're still disappointed in them. And you're going like, man, like I survived that, but like, how can anybody trust this team? Like this is the spot for the Vikings. Now, if they lose this game and like, maybe it's because of COVID protocols and all of that sort of thing, they don't have the horses to do it. But if they lose this game, like this season's going to go off the rails here pretty quick for the Vikings. So this is me thinking that they can at least cling to hope here with a big road win against the Chargers.
I like it. The 4-4 Falcons. Not sure how much I like them, even though they came through for us last week. But now that 4-4 Falcons team is in Dallas. 6-2 Cowboys are 9-point favorites at home. Now, I got to be a little honest here. I'm surprised that this line is only 9 points. And I say that because I was hoping to be able to take the Falcons at maybe plus double digits or something like that.
Sure.
So at 9, I still like the Falcons, but I was wishing that it could be a lot more.
I'm going to twist you up here on this one. I like the Cowboys in this game. I like the Cowboys laying all these points. And like, this is not something everybody's probably sitting there going like, hold on here. This is normally the point of the program where he gives 4 or 5 live underdogs, et cetera here. Listen, the Cowboys couldn't have been worse last week. You know the rules though, right? Like the worse you are one week, the better you are the next week and vice versa, right? And the massive motivator, the prime motivator for professional sports teams, let alone NFL teams, but particularly in the NFL is what? It's embarrassment. Right? If you got embarrassed last week and you have the functionality to do something about it, you are going to play really well the next week, right? You are going to be focused through practice. You're going to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, your P's and Q's and all of that sort of thing. And the Cowboys are capable of that, right? I think the same thing goes for the Bills, right? Where it's like you don't get more embarrassed than 30-0 at one point against the Broncos, unless you lose to the Jags, in which case you can be more embarrassed in that instance. So we've got 2 teams here that have just been chewing on it all week, right? And from a line standpoint, this number should be higher because the Falcons aren't a better team than the Broncos. And the Broncos were 10-point underdogs at Dallas last week. So now the Falcons are 9-point underdogs. Like, would you really have the Falcons favored over the Broncos on a neutral field in this weird universe where maybe these 2 teams go on a run and face each other on a neutral field in the Super Bowl? I don't think that's going to happen. But if they played in a neutral field in the Super Bowl or on the streets, like, I think the Broncos are the better team. And that's even saying, we'll get to that game here shortly. But I at 9, there's some 8s out there. Like once we get into that 9 territory, right? Like you can kind of tweak some things. Like there are places that you can get a -8 for like -112, -115, something along those lines, right? Because 9 is such a soft, weird number. I think the indicator here with 9 being sort of the root number is the 6-point teaser, right? They don't want to give you 8.5. They don't want to give you 8 because you can tease that under 3. Not that they should, right? But I think the Falcons are going to be a popular play because, they just pulled that off, that upset. When you look at their record, right? Like, it's like, oh, this team's actually kind of in the mix here, right? Like they are on the in the hunt category. I think they're actually in the playoffs right now if they quote unquote started today, which by the way, they have yet to ever start today when somebody says if the playoffs started today. There is no concern about the playoffs starting today when someone says if the playoffs started today. I like the Cowboys here, right? Like this has all the makings of a Matt Ryan throwing off his back foot, throwing a pick 6, something along those lines. The Cowboys defense can focus on Kyle Pitts. Like the Saints should have been able to do that, but we talked about that last week, right? Matchups in the NFL. We know why we bet the Saints against the Buccaneers. We know why we bet the Falcons against the Saints. It's not because the Falcons are better than the Buccaneers. It's just that like these matchups work a little bit differently, especially in division. Now, this game's obviously not in division, but it's the Dan Quinn revenge game, right? Yeah. Defensive coordinator Dan Quinn of the Cowboys, former Falcons head coach. Now, obviously, a little bit of different offense, Arthur Smith in the mix, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, it's not like he knows them up and down, but he certainly knows Matt Ryan up and down, right? So I expect maybe a potential defensive touchdown, certainly a couple of turnovers here for the Cowboys. Dak and the gang here, a lot more focus. The key injury. Let me ask you this, right? And this isn't any sort of gotcha question, but for the Cowboys, with the point, factoring in relative to the point spread, who's the most important player on the Cowboys?
Ooh, that's a great question. Do you know what? Because I feel like I'm going to say someone on their O-line.
Well, exactly. That was like the point. The point of the question is from a point spread standpoint, it's Dak Prescott, right? Like if he doesn't play, we see the line moves. But from a non-point spread standpoint, a guy who's not going to shift the point spread, who is going to shift sort of how the game is played is Tyron Smith. Right. And he is questionable for this game. It would be really nice if he plays in this game because you don't have to worry about what's going on the blind side. Right. You don't have to send an extra guy over there, a tight end to block, et cetera, et cetera. That unlocks kind of everything else when you can just leave him over there to be awesome. So he's been sort of out of practice. Does he need to practice necessarily? No, but he's obviously a really key element here. If you're going to lay points here and expect the Dallas offense to put up the 30 plus points that they may need here to win and cover this game. But I think they do it. I think this is a really good spot for the Cowboys. I think a lot of things are going in their favor. including getting this in single digits, as you mentioned. So yeah, Dallas -9 all day in this one.
See, that's so weird for me because I look at it and I started off by saying this line just seems weird. And that's one of the things that I always try to catch myself on, depending on which way am I leaning normally and why am I finding this so strange? Right? Because I'm anticipating wanting to take the Falcons, but there's something messed up about this line. So I find that super interesting. A game that I don't really find that interesting. And I mean, hey, you can stop me and we can stop here for a second before we move on. But the Jets, the 2-6 Jets at home to the Bills. Bills are 12-point favorites. And all I was going to say is Mike White named the starter. That's all I need to know. I'm taking the points.
Right.
And I'm half joking here, but the reality is Buffalo, I see the similarities between Buffalo and the Cowboys last week. So do you kind of follow the same suit here, or is it 12 points too much for you?
Yeah, like that's the point, right? It's like, okay, the Bills are going to have that same level of embarrassment and the same level of focus. And now they have a division game. Listen, nobody's worried about the Jets necessarily competing in the division. But from a point spread standpoint, let's look at it this way, right? This line opens 13. And that was sort of on the presumption that Zach Wilson was going to be back, right? Because it's like, he's the future. We got to get him back in the lineup. And it's like, no, let's still try to win a game here with Mike White. Now, we've seen Mike White play, and through 5 quarters, everybody's really excited. And if Mike White just walked off the field, waved to the crowd, and never came back, like, it would be the legend of Mike White because we think that highly of him. Yeah. But this is less about Mike White, and it's more about everything else that's going on here with the Jets. Because Mike White leaves that game, right? And it's easy to go, well, if Mike White was still in the game, like the Jets might have won or might have covered. But like Josh Johnson comes in and like racks up yardage and racks up stats. So it's like, was Mike White going to do better than Josh Johnson? Like maybe he does as well. And we get to that last play and it doesn't throw an interception and they get through the back door. But like, it's not like we were replacing statistics here in the rest of that Colts game that weren't very good, right? Yeah. Mike White has to reach that same standard that Johnson did. And even if he does, the Jets still didn't cover that game, right? Like they still lost by double digits. Like their offense was that quote unquote good, and they still lost by double digits. And the reason for that is their defense is an atrocity. Right? It is so bad. And on top of that, they just lost Marcus May, arguably their best player on defense, which is all you need to say about the Jets is that their best player potentially is a safety. That's just fundamentally bad business if that's the case. And he's out, right? So like Josh Allen and company should be able to have an absolute field day here. It's not like there's a ton in the way of home field advantage for the Jets. And if the assumption is like Mike White is going to save the day here and they cover this game, I'm going to be really, really disappointed in the Bills. Like really like they could win this game by 10 and it could be like relatively comfortable in doing so. I'm going to be really disappointed in that team because again, this is a focus spot. This is a spot that like it lines up perfectly because the Bills don't really want to run the football anyway, which is what the Jets are at least okay at doing defensively. So like Brian Daboll might throw the ball 97% of the time here in this game, and he would probably be like within full rights to do so. And if he does, and they have a ton of success here, like this game could get mega loose, mega quick here because the Bills defense has something to prove here, even though they only gave up 9 points to the Jags in the loss, right? Like we can say, oh man, they lost to the Jags. But like if they only give up 9 points to the Jets this week, they're going to cover this number because the Bills are going to put up 30 relatively easily on the Jets this week. So this is another one. Listen, I'm loath to lay double digits. I'm loath to do so on the road. But if there was ever a time where I could see it, right, I could understand you doing so, this is absolutely it because this line moves down to 12 because Mike White is involved. And like, yeah, I get that he's better than Zach Wilson right now. But it's not about him in this one. It's about the Jets defense getting absolutely torched by Josh Allen and the Bills here in not a revenge spot, but certainly a get right spot for Buffalo.
Super interesting. And as I started this is the theme of this pod for me, afraid to lay points, but the bounce back from the Cowboys and the Bills, super, super interesting for sure in terms of me thinking about laying those points. But I don't know about laying these points here in our next game, as we have the 5-4 Broncos laying 2.5 points at home to the 3-6 Eagles. And for me, we know our basic rule of Teddy Two Gloves as an underdog. We love it. Teddy Two Gloves is here as a favorite. So suddenly I'm not liking it as much, but under a field goal at home, I don't know. I still want to lean Teddy Two Gloves. I'm not going to lie to you here.
And this is the thing, right? And you mentioned the under the field goal element, right? Because obviously that takes away a lot of the underdog, favorite type thing. Because once you get under a field goal, you can go to overtime and still win the game by 3 points. Here's the thing, right? If you saw +3, you probably should have taken it. I took it with Philly, and now it's gone down to 2.5. And I think that's kind of all you need to know, right? Because the +3 was there and everybody gobbled that up. And I don't know if we get back to that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. To me, this is less about last week's games on both sides, but certainly Denver, right? We talked about how, listen, we talked the Dallas Cowboys Falcons game and being like, well, how can the Falcons be 9 when Denver was 10? I should mention part of that was because the 10 number was stupid, right? Like we were on Denver +10 last week. Like it made no sense for Dallas to be a 10-point favorite against Denver. So at least worth mentioning from that standpoint. From this game, I look at this game more like the Washington Denver game from 2 weeks ago, where we were on Denver -3 and we cashed and all's well that ended well. But the experience of watching that game wasn't exactly well, right? It was not fun in any way, shape, or form, right? But you had the Washington football team doing their force field, don't want anything to do with actually scoring points, like want to get as close as we can without scoring points type offense. Well, the Eagles are a little bit better at busting through that force field, right? They're a little bit better at getting those points. And Jalen Hurts on the ground here, I think, is something to watch. I mean, not that we always watch for Jalen Hurts on the ground. That's his best skill. But this is going to be a situation here where he's going to be able to take advantage of that, particularly in the red zone, right? So the Eagles are going to be able to score in a way that Taylor Heineke and the Washington football team weren't against the Broncos defense that had some success last week, but is by and large wildly overrated at this point, right? A lot of it has to do with injuries. Speaking of injuries, Garrett Bowles out for Denver again, which is going to be problematic against the front four of the Philadelphia Eagles, which is the best thing that they do defensively. So I think it's actually a really good matchup for the Eagles on the road. Always a little bit sketchy in Denver. You never know what's necessarily going to go down there. We might have multiple 60-yard field goal attempts from these two kickers, right? Because Jake Elliott can get it out there. I grabbed the +3 at +2.5. I'm certainly less interested because I've already got the +3, but I think the Eagles are very live to win this game outright. So anything plus, 110 +20 on the money line is absolutely a play for me there as well. In a game that I think is an absolute coin flip that I think the Eagles will actually win.
All right. Speaking of teams looking for a win, the 0-8 Lions are at the 5-3 Steelers. Steelers are favored by 8 points, and the 8 points jumped out at me, but not as much as their record jumped out at me, because I had to double check this when I looked at it. It's like, wait, the Steelers are 5-3. How? I don't really understand how, even though I feel like I'm pretty locked in, week out, but maybe that's just the frustration of dealing with their point spread. But either way, 8 points, way too many points for me. I like the Lions and the points. And it's just as simple as that. The Steelers might have thrown some people off the scent, but not me. I still don't think they're good. And I like the Lions here plus the points.
Yeah, I don't know who's not able to smell this, because it is ripe, right? That game on Monday night, and we'd be a lot more bitter about the Steelers record if we weren't able to sort of pinpoint a lot of these spots where the Steelers either getting points or giving points were good underdog plays, right? Steelers week 1 against the Bills. It's I don't know how they're going to cover this game, but they just are. They win that game outright, right? That seems insane weeks later. But again, 5-3, maybe it isn't, right? But fundamentally, the Steelers aren't built to blow teams out. Right. It's just not, it's an old school group. It's just an old group. If you're looking at Ben Roethlisberger, who, by the way, shoulder injury, allegedly, God love Ben Roethlisberger and the I'm always injured thing. It's you are going to be always injured because you're 40 years old and you've lived a life of you've lived 60 years of hard life. Here's what it comes down to for me. So market standpoint, line opens 9.5 and comes down to 8. Right. And so all right, pretty good indicator here that somebody's on the Lions. I am one of those somebodies. But from a football standpoint, right? Like what's the thing that we're worried about from the Steelers, right? Like we're not worried about Ben Roethlisberger. We're not worried about their run game, not because of Najee Harris. He's awesome, but because the offensive line still stinks, right? They didn't do anything to make that group better. We're worried about the defense, particularly the front four. TJ Watt, superhero diving, fumble forcing TJ Watt, 3 sacks per game, TJ Watt. So what do we need? Well, we need the Lions to do the only thing that they are built to do at this point, and that is block. Like their offensive line is the best part of that team. And you're saying to yourself, well, the last couple of weeks have not been good. Well, here's the thing. Taylor Decker, the best player on that team. Speaking of who's the guy who matters most on a team? Like it's Taylor Decker and it's not even close, right? Left tackle, protecting Jared Goff's blind spot. If there's a human being who needs protection on his blind spot, it's certainly Jared Goff. So he's back. Taylor Decker is to left tackle. That moves first round pick Penei Sewell over to right tackle. So instead of Jared Goff looking out of the side of his right eye, wondering if whatever's going on at right tackle is going to work out, now he can at least go, all right, I'm safe. I'm safe from those two outside presence, right? And Frank Ragnow, the center, the third piece of this built offensive line here, the cornerstone of this team going forward, he's out for the season. But the replacement center, this young kid, he's done very well in all of the things that centers do, right? Protections and blocking, et cetera, et cetera. And so now you get the full strength offensive line here, which is obviously critical to go against the Pittsburgh defensive line. We saw Justin Fields eventually just let loose and try some deep shots. Now, they didn't always connect, but they were open. Now, I don't know that they're necessarily always going to connect here with Jared Goff either, but like the Steelers secondary can absolutely be had. Now, maybe it's, a bunch of randoms, right? Like Khalif Raymond and St. Brown and et cetera, right? But like all it takes is a couple long shots to connect for this game to really tighten up on the scoreboard. And when you talk about Ben Roethlisberger, like there's some weather issues here. So it's going to be kind of chaos where Jared Goff in his small hands and Ben Roethlisberger and his pump fakes that fall out of his hands. Like there's going to be a lot happening in this game. But, you can get through all the BS about, Dan Campbell and he's crying and the team's trying really hard. The only thing I'll sort of say about the coaching staff here is we saw against the Rams that they were willing to try some stuff, right? They're willing to come in with a game plan where we're like, you know what, let's try to win this. This isn't the Texans where it's like, let's line up and hope for the best. They try stuff. They just had 2 weeks to prepare for this game, right? They had the bye week. And meanwhile, the Steelers have the short week. So like Mike Tomlin's not trying stuff. Mike Tomlin's just trying to get his guys healthy, get to the next game and get out of there with a win, which they have done pretty well so far this season, being 5-3. Whereas the Lions have like got some stuff cooked up. Now, maybe it all goes to hell in a handbasket when he tries some of this stuff, but at least they're efforting this, right? So they're going to be able to try to steal a couple of possessions. So turn it on right now. There it is. Yep. It's the red light special, everybody. It took us long enough to get here, but you knew we would. I like the Lions as listen, it's a plus 300. It is not particularly likely. I'm just saying it's possible. The red light special here, the upset of the week, however you want to frame it. I think the Lions actually get their first win. It's always sort of when you least expect it. I don't know that this is necessarily a least expected situation, but there's nothing with the Lions that says their first win has to come at home, right? Like they don't have this great home field advantage. It might be a disadvantage at this point because everybody expects it to go poorly. They're going to sneak one out here. It's probably going to come on the road. And I think it's against a very vulnerable Steelers team here. The red light special on the Detroit Lions. Like when that red light special song from TLC comes on, it could go really well, or it could go really badly. We'll have to see. Let's hope it goes really well.
So the thing I find interesting here is obviously Steelers are 8-point favorites, which is one of the bigger lines here that we have this week. And as things kind of dwindle down, because it's week 10 for survivor pools as well, if the Steelers aren't one of the teams people should be looking at, I mean, I feel like a lot of people probably have taken the Cowboys, probably have taken the Bucks already. Who are we looking at here survivor-wise? Very quickly, though. We got to move on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spoiled this on Tuesday, right? It's the Colts. We had them saved for this spot. It's why we sweated out the Ravens last week. We wanted to get the Colts when most people can't, right? So they've had a bunch of relatively easy games this year. 85% of the population in the Circa Survivor contest has taken the Colts already. All of these contests are kind of the same, right? Whether it's your 100-person one at home, your 4,001 in Las Vegas, percentage wise, it's all kind of the same. So if you're in a 100-person one, there's probably only 15 people who can use the Colts. Hopefully that's you, because they are the play this week in Survivor. Everybody else is live to lose. I hope a bunch of people take the Steelers, because I think a bunch of people could go down with that. I think a lot of people went down last night with the Ravens.
I like it. And before we get to the Sunday Nighter, I want to give a reminder of the DRF Sports Sunday Scoop e-newsletter, which had yet another winning week. That's 9 straight for our guy, Scott Gramling, and a 20-7 record against the spread. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up for free at drf.com/sports to receive 2 free weekly newsletters delivered to your inbox every Friday and Sunday. Both are packed with powerful betting angles you don't want to miss. So make sure you sign up for the Sunday Scoop e-newsletter and check out Scott's weekly 6-pack. Plus, of course, the in-depth game previews at drf.com/sports. Bottom line is we got you covered, especially as we head into this Sunday Nighter. The 5-4 Chiefs are 2.5-point favorites in Las Vegas against the 5-3 Raiders. And this one's pretty simple for me. I've seen enough of the Chiefs this season, and I know normally I jump at the Chiefs at -2.5, but instead I'm doing the opposite. And the home dogs, prime time, it's just, if you just blindly have been taking home dogs in prime time football games this season, you're doing pretty well. And so for me to jump on this now, it'll probably go the other way, but I'm at least shooting my shot, and I'm on the Raiders here in the points. What are you saying?
Yeah, it's funny. So this is maybe sort of a tip more than anything else, right? Like I, just like everybody else, have a tendency, especially I'm looking ahead to the next week, right? And I'm doing so like while games are being played on Sunday, and certainly when the lines come out on Sunday night. And so my first instinct in this game before I ever saw the point spread was, the Raiders are going to win that game, right? Because you're watching the Chiefs, you're just like, this team's terrible. Like, again, relatively speaking, but like overall, just still not particularly good. And so it's easy to just be like, yeah, Raiders going to win this game. And I think back to last year where, I frame it always kind of like, when did we see this matchup last, right? And you and I would have talked about it last year, but like this game was like 6-7, like that kind of thing from a point spread standpoint, right? So you see the adjustment that at least, we talk about the Chiefs tax, at least the adjustment has been made here. There isn't really any difference from the Raiders from this year to last year. The difference is entirely in the Chiefs, right? And so like how much of a difference should there be? And so there's certainly no Chiefs tax anymore. If there was, this game would be lined over 3. Yeah. I know a bunch of sharp guys out there who like know what they're talking about, and they like the Chiefs a lot because this game, feels like it might be an overreaction to what we've seen from the Chiefs. But like, how many more of these games do we have to see from the Chiefs, right? Like to decide that this just isn't it, right? Now, the problem with the Raiders is you can look at that and go, okay, off-field stuff, right? Like last 2 weeks, they've had to cut their first round picks from 2 years ago, right? Their 2020 draft has nothing left from a first round standpoint because they drafted fools, frankly. Like, speaking of guys that we want to F out of this league, like those 2 dudes are definitely 2 of those types. And those 2 will probably never play again. Is that necessarily a good thing? Maybe long-term for the Raiders, but short-term, right? Things get a lot thinner. At least the Raiders will have Deshaun Jackson in the lineup, who's going to do the things that the gentleman who was probably going to serve some jail time does on a football field. So that's fine. But the defense for the Raiders, right? When you cut a secondary player, right? A defensive back against the Chiefs, like that's always a little bit scary. So whether it's the line being under 3, that's kind of scaring me off the Raiders, or the obviously, off-field stuff that's happened for the Raiders, this is one where I'm a little more hesitant. But you know what the rule is, right? +2.5. What do we do? It's the first instinct on +2.5s, tease to 8.5, find some other legs. We've got a Cleveland Las Vegas teaser that is just begging for it at this point at plus 2.5 to go in both cases up to 8.5. I think that's a really good way to play both of those games, especially with some of these other games that might have been 2.5s being solid 3s and 3.5s, like the Saints, like the Vikings, like the Eagles. Obviously the Eagles at 2.5 become a very teasable game as well. So a bunch of different options to get my favorite type of tease, which is from 2.5 up to 8.5. If everybody expects this game to be close, and I think everybody does, you want to have 8.5 points. You're going to pay for it minus 270. But in this case, I think that's worth your while here. So maybe finish off the day with a little tease. We'll see what happens on Sunday night as far as where this line goes. Maybe a bunch of Kansas City money comes in, and maybe we can get the Raiders at +3, at which point that becomes a lot more viable. This one from a against the spread standpoint is just having me sort of, take a step back a little bit here, but hopefully I'll have a bunch of teasers lined up and riding on the Raiders plus 8.5 on Sunday night.
From a game Sunday night in Vegas involving the Raiders to a game that's just sitting nicely in the Vegas zone, as we got the 3-5 Niners hosting the 7-2 Rams. Rams are 4-point favorites on the road. And, the home dogs, the Vegas zone, normally I'd be sitting here and it's my Niners. And principal tells me that I should be taking the Niners as home dogs, taking the points in the Vegas zone. But I can't do it. I just cannot do it. I don't like it, but I'm taking the Rams and the 4 points. And I know that there's part of me here. I'm going to be very honest here. And this is a part that we can quote as if we're watching that game on Monday night and the Rams are driving to kick a game-winning field goal and win this game by 3 points while I went on this whole thing to crush my Niners, that would just be beautifully written out just in how the last few weeks have been going for me here. But with that said, I'm still on the Rams against all logic. And I'm interested to hear how you're going to tell me I'm wrong here.
Well, it's interesting that you say against all logic, right? Because the world is on the Rams, right? So they've all apparently got the logic, right? Because you look at any of the betting counts, it's 90% on the Rams, right? So common logic, quote unquote, is that the Rams are the side here.
Okay. But this is not what we're talking about. You know what I'm saying, though? This is what right?
But
come on.
You're not going to have to worry about this whole Rams field goal at the end of the game situation, because the 49ers are going to win this game outright, and they're going to do so relatively comfortably. Okay. So, and you laugh because that's, that seems devoid of logic, right? That's right. So
and I did this last week. We did this last week.
We did this last week, right? And again, we talked about on Tuesday, I'd make that bet again at plus money pricing. I would never make that bet at -5, 5.5, because I don't trust Shanahan to cover a spread as a favorite, right? But, Kyle Shanahan, I don't know if he's still got Falcons DNA or Matt Ryan DNA. I don't even want to get into how that could actually happen. But it's the same kind of deal. Aaron Rodgers would know. They're going to win this game, man. They're first and foremost, right? If it wasn't for last week and the disappointment and rule, and again, I always say rule number one, there's probably 17 rule number ones, but one of them is if a team disappoints you, sorry, that sucks, but don't let that cloud your judgment and affect how you're going to bet the next day. Adjust your ratings as you see fit and know sort of how to calculate all of this stuff. And once I do that, as harsh as I am on the 49ers, I still have this under a field goal for the Rams, right? But the reason that it's 4 is because of the perception and what we saw, and everybody hates Shanahan, and I am certainly right there with him. He should be fired at the end of the season, right? But what do we talk about, right? Matchups, Atlanta, New Orleans, New Orleans and Tampa, matchups. Shell, you're a 49ers fan. Yeah. Who have the 49ers owned no matter what in the last couple of years? As bad as it's gotten, Nick Mullins involved, right? And seasons where they finish not dead last, obviously, but in the bottom 5 because all things go to hell from a injury standpoint. The Los Angeles Rams, the 49ers are 4-0 straight up against the Los Angeles Rams the last 4 matchups, the last 2 years. And that's with Nick Mullins starting. That's without George Kittle. That's home. That's away. That's when you don't expect them to win. That's when you might expect them to win. But most of the time you don't, because again, these injury things have piled up over the course of the last couple of years. Again, 49ers were brutal, but they were brutal in a way last week that was incredibly frustrating. They were brutal in that they fumbled the football. They were brutal in that they couldn't recover a fumble, even if it was lying like right on their tummy, right? Like they literally couldn't just go, yeah, I'll take this football that's right here. Like it was a horror show from that standpoint. From a yardage standpoint, right? Those 2 fumbles on really promising drives. Are they necessarily going to end in touchdowns? No, but like they certainly going to end in scores in all likelihood. And they could have snuffed out a few Cardinals drives there by recovering a couple of fumbles as well. There is nothing more luck-based than fumble recoveries. The 49ers have absolutely the worst fumble recovery rate in the league this year. They get absolutely no luck. So that's part of the issue in all of this from a, season-long standpoint, where it's just a team that's really unlucky. It's also a team that's been really unhealthy, right? But again, we talked about it going into last week. It's why they were 5.5-point favorites. They're getting a little bit healthier here, right? Like, again, George Kittle will miss a couple practices, but like he'll be ready to go. He'll be ready to play. Brandon Ayuk finally involved in the offense, right? Like these things are starting to happen here a little bit for the 49ers. And so it's a terrible matchup for the Rams. We have seen that over and over again. This is a 49ers team. Like the Rams, you want to match up against a team that isn't going to be able to misdirect Aaron Donald, right? You can't block Aaron Donald. Nobody can do it, right? 2 people, 3 people, doesn't matter. What you want to do is you want to make him go that way and you go that way, right? Like that's what the 49ers do. Jalen Ramsey, all right. You don't want to have Jalen Ramsey, you don't want to have your best wide receiver going up against Jalen Ramsey and have to force feed your best wide receiver. 49ers don't really have a best wide receiver. Obviously, Deebo Samuel is having this great season. A lot of that's on touch passing behind the line of scrimmage, et cetera, right? He's having this nice season. But like if you can get the Kittles of the world, if you can get Ayuk into this game, now you've got something here. And that's what the Rams, that's their failures in these games against the 49ers, is that like they do what they do and it works a lot of the time, but it just doesn't work against the 49ers. They can get this done. I think they win this game outright. It's going to confuse a lot of people. It's going to frustrate a lot of people, but we are going to be there. Plus 170 on the money line, certainly taking the +4 on the points in contests, every which way but loose. Yeah. And honestly, man, like maybe I said it last week, who knows, maybe I've said it in weeks past. I mean, there's been a fair amount of times where we faded the 49ers, certainly with the Colts on that Sunday night game. But if we don't see the absolute best out of the 49ers on a Monday night home game here against a Rams team that they have owned in recent memory, man, like Shanahan just pack stuff up and get out, because you're done literally that week, I think, or he should be. I mean, he probably won't be, but he should. Give me the 49ers.
I hear you. I think the Niners are done. I just think the Niners are done. I don't know.
And the market agrees with you.
A good read on them this season, clearly. But
right.
But
the market agrees with you, and that's why it's 4, right? And it's like, but listen, if Odell Beckham Jr. plays, and they might bump that line even higher because people are like, Odell Beckham Jr. Like, this is great. Like we might get 4.5s, right? We might get 5s.
Then we're getting silly. Yeah, we're getting silly, and I'll gladly take the points. I mean,
well, the whole league is silly at this point, right? But yeah, no, I mean, listen, you can roll with it or you can not. I understand the trepidation. But yeah, this is what we do. This line should be 2. This line should be 2.5, and it's not because of everything that we've seen here in the last like week or 2, right? But the Rams are not infallible either. And should not be 4 to 4.5 point road favorites against a functional team. Now, again, maybe the 49ers aren't functional. And if that's the case, jump ship hard the rest of the season.
It's true. And I mean, hey, we saw the Rams last week. It's not like they looked much like a functional team, or Matt Stafford looked like a functional QB last week either. So I totally understand where we're coming from here. One thing, though, as we switch over to college football, because things are getting real spicy there. And, things are heating up as we get closer to the college football playoff. And a bunch of teams that I would like to say are in the mix, even though, there's varying levels of reality to said mix, but you get what I'm saying here. So let's start with the big games here. And, you know, I want you to kind of go through these and we can speed through, because there's some games that I'm interested in. And then there's some games where it's like Purdue plus 21 at OSU. Do you know what I mean? Like there's some very interesting lines here and then some ones like that. So let's get through some of the big games here. Let's start with Oklahoma at Baylor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people like Baylor in this game. And I think the line is sort of indicative of that, crawling underneath 6. I like Oklahoma here. Maybe I'm the literal last guy on the bandwagon, on the Sooners wagon that comes rolling out before every game. Hopefully that doesn't topple over on me this week. I actually like the road favorite Sooners here, -5.5. I think that team's getting better defensively. They have certainly had a bunch of kind of tune-ups here leading up to this game. And obviously their schedule gets a lot tougher here with Iowa State and the Bedlam game against Oklahoma State coming up here, but like it's full focus. And that's the situation when you are getting left out of the college football playoff and you're an undefeated Oklahoma team who can't even get top 4 credit for their season. And people aren't giving them top 4 credit because they've struggled against some really poor teams. But part of that is because Spencer Rattler was struggling against those really poor teams. Mm-hmm. Well, Spencer Rattler's sitting on that sideline, right? He's got a scrunkly face on. He's got the hat pulled down. He's really upset about life because Caleb Williams balls out there. And I think it's, you know, my stance is that it's too late for Caleb Williams to win the Heisman. He's going to be the Heisman favorite next year. And so if that's the case, and he's Heisman capable as far as his play is concerned, he can absolutely go on the road and beat Baylor this week, right? Like they are not, this isn't a look ahead situation because they need to ball out here for every one of these games. And so Baylor can be an attractive home underdog. We saw them get Iowa State. We saw them, you know, beat Texas, et cetera, et cetera. I like Oklahoma here. I think this is a team that's on the rise here, and that a month from now will find themselves in the college football playoff and will be a very interesting matchup for whoever they get in that college football playoff. You mentioned Purdue and Ohio State, right? And like, it's a big game if they lose, right? And like, there's another one that I'll mention here once we get to the hurry up offense, but like, it's not a big game because it's a 21-point spread, but like Purdue's got a few pelts on their wall here, right? And I know that makes it very attractive for Purdue here. And listen, I'm going to be the sucker that takes the 21 points here with Purdue because they've, you know, shown that they can obviously beat Michigan State, Nebraska. There's one other, Iowa, right? Obviously, Ohio State's a different deal here. This might be a shootout type game where we might end up losing 45-21 and Ohio State covers, but they just haven't done that, right? Ohio State has not done that this year. So I'll just keep daring them to do that. We have made enough money sort of backing the, you know, the underdog against Ohio State here a couple of times. So yeah, I'm fine with that. That's only a big game if that's close, right? Speaking of close games, Michigan and Penn State. Is this a big game? Well, it's a big game sort of in name only, but also like as that second tier element in the Big Ten East. And listen, it's Jim Harbaugh, right? It's Jim Harbaugh on the road. It's not necessarily a ranked team, even though Penn State's probably a top 25 team in the country. Meanwhile, James Franklin, he's taken job interviews and taken phone calls. And like, there's alleging like jets are coming to pick him up or coming to interview him, all that kind of stuff. He's got one foot out the door. I still can't back Harbaugh on the road with this Michigan team. I'm going to take Penn State in this game, plus 1.5. I don't know that the spread's necessarily going to matter in that one. But the one that I love the most, again, it's not a big game until, you know, it's the fourth quarter and you're like, oh my God, the season's in the balance here. The Washington State Cougars, our Cougs, most under radar team in the country, are going to Oregon this week. Oregon just beat Washington. That was a sloppy mess of a game in the rain. We thought Washington could compete. Their Washington offense is so incredibly bad that it's infuriating to watch. And like to have that quarterback run out there, you know, meanwhile, Washington coach is like pushing and punching kids on the face on the sideline. It's just a mess. I'm not going to judge Oregon because they, you know, took down Washington. That Washington team is a mess. I'm going to judge Washington State on what they've done on the field since Nick Rolovich got the axe for not getting vaccinated. That Washington State football team is super, super live in this game, even though it's on the road against Oregon. Listen, it's not like it's a weather situation where like Washington State's uncomfortable in that weather. They play in Pullman, Washington, right? Like they know the weather here. So we're getting 14 points here. That is a definite automatic, like love that play. I doubled down on that this week for my work over at The Score. I think the Cougs are live to win this game. They just went to ASU, Arizona State, and won as 2 touchdown underdogs there. You know, asking them to do it a second time seems like a stretch. but I don't trust this Oregon team at this point, right? Like they play tight, close defensive style games here. When you do that, you leave yourself open to the possibility of losing. This is the game that's going to be more important than it looks on the schedule, especially since Oregon's maybe looking ahead to Utah next week, a team that they might, if all things go well for Oregon, have to face in the Pac-12 championship. It's a classic sandwich spot here. I'm gonna grab a big bite of that sandwich with Washington State here, and also a little money line action as well.
Ooh, that's a pretty fuego fire way to keep things going here and keep things rolling into the hurry up offense. The music has already started. So I'm just going to clear out and let you go, because here's the thing, man. You're already talking about covering big spreads, big time underdog wins. It just makes me even more interested to find out what you got for us this week in the hurry up offense.
And listen, last week we had 19. I thought to myself as I was going through games this week, it's like, it's mid to late November here. We got to start paring this down. We got to tighten this up. Like some of these teams, it's tough to sort of get a read on. They're getting towards the end of the season. Then I looked up, and I got 20 games. I got 20 games on the hurry up offense this week. So we got to go super quick here. First and foremost, UCF +7 at SMU. Speaking of coaches that have one foot out the door, SMU's coach has one foot out the door. Gus Malzahn starting to get what he wants out of this UCF team. The defense is playing a lot better here in the last 3 games since they got blown out against Cincinnati here. I think SMU is absolutely toast at this point in the season. Give me UCF on the way up, SMU on the way down. Central Florida +7. Talked about Michigan and Penn State, so we don't need to talk about that one again. Mississippi State +5.5 at Auburn. This like meaty part of the curve in the SEC, like just seems to be every game really, really close. Whether it's Mississippi State, Texas A&M, Auburn, Ole Miss, Arkansas, all of these teams, like they always comes down to a last second type of a play here. Give me Mississippi State +5.5 to hang in there at Auburn. West Virginia +6.5 against Kansas State. Now, West Virginia struggled last week against Oklahoma State. That defense is so good for the Cowboys. Can't really blame them for that. Kansas State has qualified for a bowl game. Congratulations, 6 wins. That's outstanding. Here are the teams that they beat in the last 3 weeks to do so. Texas Tech fired the coach after. TCU fired the coach after. And Kansas, who is Kansas. So, I'm not getting too excited about what Kansas State has been doing. I like backing Kansas State as an underdog, not as a favorite. Give me West Virginia +6.5. Georgia State and Coastal Carolina. Grayson McCall out for the season for Coastal Carolina. Didn't matter last week as Coastal covered the number once it got adjusted down. I think this Georgia State team from the start of the year didn't work out the way that we had hoped for them as a mega long shot in the Sun Belt necessarily. But I think this team is a little scrappy, and that second game after you lose your star player is always a little bit dicey in any sport, certainly when it's your quarterback. Give me Georgia State +10.5. BC and Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech gave Miami everything that they could possibly handle. We talked last week about BC and the red bandana game on Friday. We sort of took a pass on that +3. Of course, they won comfortably. Missed out on that one. Hopefully, maybe you back BC as a do as I say, not as I do situation there. But now they go on the road against Georgia Tech, a team that is live, certainly live. They're the favorite in this game, but they're live to put up a ton of points here against a BC defense that's pretty good. But Georgia Tech, I think, wins this game. -2 there for Georgia Tech. Georgia and Tennessee, we talked about it. Is it a big game? No, not until the fourth quarter when things might be getting a little bit dicey. I don't even really know if it's going to get dicey for Georgia in the fourth quarter. But Hendon Hooker and the Tennessee Volunteers offense here is probably the best offense that Georgia has seen this year. And if you can score even a little bit against Georgia, right? It's not an explosive offense for Georgia. Just don't turn the ball over. Don't pull a Florida Gators where it's 3-0 almost at halftime, and then you just turn it over 3 straight times and Georgia gets 3 touchdowns and all of a sudden the game's over by halftime. That was brutal. I think Tennessee does a little bit better there. I think Georgia wins the game, but 20 is a lot here. Give me Tennessee +20. Miami and Florida State. Let's try to get 3. 3 is always important in Miami, Florida State games going back to 1991. Try to get to 3 here. Either way, I think Florida State's being underrated because they had a flu situation. An old school flu, right? Nothing crazy, nothing with a number attached to it. Just a bunch of guys who have the flu. So they have to start Mackenzie Milton last week, which worked out for us because we were on NC State. I don't know if that game would have been the same way if Jordan Travis had gotten to play. He's going to play against Miami here. Again, Miami a little bit overrated. We talked about about that last week in getting the cover with Georgia Tech. So give me Florida State. I think they have a good chance to win this game, but I'm going to want the 3 here with Florida State. Hawaii, UNLV. This is pretty simple. Hawaii, a little bit scrappy at home. Not even scrappy enough, right? We ended up getting the cover with them against San Diego State. I expected them to win that game. Anytime they've gone to the mainland this season, they have gotten absolutely destroyed. UNLV is nothing to write home about. They've got their first win of the year last week. Maybe they got a little taste for victory now here, and they are 3.5-point home underdogs to Hawaii. I like UNLV to get their second win of the year here against the Rainbow Warriors. South Carolina and Missouri. South Carolina, the big story down in Florida is they trucked the Gators last week, and Dan Mullen is like clinging to his existence as the coach. That's because South Carolina stinks, and Missouri's not that much better here, but like if you told me this was going to be basically a pick'em game here a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whatever, I would have been thrilled with that. So I'm going to take Missouri minus the 1. Game that absolutely nobody wants to watch, and nor should you. Tulsa at Tulane. This is pretty fundamental here. Both these teams stink. What do we do when both teams stink? Especially if there's a home underdog. We take the points. Points. Tulane plus 3 in a don't watch that game and just check the score later type of an outfit. Keep going here. Stanford, Oregon State. Stanford is absolutely toast. They're even talking about firing the coach at this point, which is kind of an unheard of thing at Stanford. Oregon State minus 12.5. I think they absolutely run right over Stanford this week. Texas A&M and Ole Miss. This one kind of goes against everything that we've been doing the last couple of weeks, which was fading Ole Miss because the schedule has sort of like caught up to them here a little bit. This is a nighttime game day at the Grove type situation here. Maybe that's a little sort of pomp and circumstancy here. But like the fact that Texas A&M's only 2.5-point favorites here is interesting to me. I think Ole Miss might actually get Texas A&M and ruin this whole like Texas A&M having an outside chance to win the SEC West if Alabama loses to, say, Auburn. I don't even think we might even get to that point here with Ole Miss potentially winning this game. Arkansas and LSU, this number was 2.5 and has gone up to 3 here for Arkansas. Classic mega letdown spot here for LSU. I think Arkansas goes into Death Valley and gets the win here. -3. If it gets back to -2.5, that would be great. Oh boy, we're betting on Kansas this week. I know at first I thought, let's just wait for the second half to fade Texas, which you absolutely should do even with a bet on Kansas here. Potentially no Bijan Robinson for Texas. This is a Texas team that like disarray second halves. They like, I don't know if it's quit. I don't know if it's conditioning. I don't know what the deal is necessarily. So whether we're betting them in the second half or betting, I should say, against them in the second half, or we're just betting on Kansas to get a couple of touchdowns in the second half and Texas to not. 31 points here for Kansas against a Texas team that only plays 30 minutes a game. I'm fine with that, even though, again, it's the Jayhawks. NC State and Wake Forest. Wake Forest loses last week to North Carolina, but the quirk there is that wasn't a league game. It was a non-conference sort of added game because those two teams, they're right down the street from each other. Might as well play every year if the conference isn't going to have us match up every single year. The good news is Wake Forest loses that game, but guess what? They're still undefeated in the league. Tons to play for when it comes to making the ACC championship game. They're only 2-point favorites here against an NC State team that, again, caught a bit of a break with that flu outbreak with Florida State last week. I'm on Wake Forest here -2. Notre Dame and Virginia. We're almost there, I promise. Notre Dame here going on the road. Again, I'm not super sold on Notre Dame. Brennan Armstrong with Virginia, probably like the least talked about entity, the Virginia offense. Super fun. He's left-handed. They're slinging it around constantly. We're going to need him to play. There is some question on whether he does. He left the BYU game a couple of weeks ago, banged up, didn't play the rest of that fourth quarter. We're getting 5.5 points, though, with Virginia. And if Brendan Armstrong's involved, I'm absolutely here for those 5.5 points, maybe even a little money line action as well. TCU and Oklahoma State. TCU with the big bump after firing the coach. That was kind of unfortunate. They're talking to Deion Sanders. Maybe you've heard of him, to be the head coach at TCU going forward. That's a little crazy. Problem is, I don't know that offense is going to score against Oklahoma State this week. This has like 24-3 written all over it. I'm pretty sure that was pretty close to the score of the the Oklahoma State and West Virginia game last week. Give me Oklahoma State -12 there. 2 more games. Colorado +17 against UCLA. Colorado's starting to get into a bit of a groove here. Chip Kelly's outfit can't play any defense. Probably no defense really to be played in this game. So it could be like a 42-30 type of a game here. Give me Colorado plus the 17. And then finally, don't watch this game either. San Jose State. Nick Starkel is back for San Jose State. San Jose State minus 4.5 against a Utah State team that's just not very good. Now that they have him back, right, this line is sort of more indicative of how they've played so far this season without him. Now that he's back, I think they win this game by a touchdown, maybe two. San Jose State, the last play. And a bonus play, college basketball tonight. 11:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Come on.
Villanova and UCLA, a top 5 matchup that starts at 11:30 tonight. So you know what? Listen, if you're an old guy like me, throw a little PVR on that. Watch it Saturday morning. 4.5 points for UCLA. I think in theory that number is a little bit high because it's a top 5 matchup, but UCLA has everybody back from last year. They are a quote unquote finished product. Villanova is probably going to be really good, right? They're probably going to be really good this season, but it's probably going to take a little bit of time here. I think UCLA wins that game tonight if you want to have a early morning sweat via the PVR because of how outrageous this 11:30 start time is.
What more can you really ask for from this podcast? Just giving you picks from all angles, different ways to watch and view your picks as well. So much whole grain goodness, as always, brought to you by my dude, Mr. Matt Russell. But if the people want more from you, and they always do, because there's so much action to be spread around, where can the people find you online?
Yeah, I tweeted about it last night, right? I'm toggling between Predators, Blues, and Pitt, North Carolina in college football. Like anybody else doing that? I mean, and sadly, a couple people were. Hockey, college football, college basketball, NFL, all of the stuff, and the celebrating and the commiserating, man. You know, certainly Monday night, we talked about on Tuesday, absolute electric factory on Twitter. At @MRussAuthentic is where all of that goes down. Some plays on there, and everything that I write over at the Score gets retweeted through that. Through that platform as well. So at @MRussAuthentic for all of our celebrating and commiserating and educational needs for all of the sports that are happening right now. Whew.
Appreciate you as always, my dude. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, brother.
Thanks to Matt for coming on the pod. And if you want to follow me online, you can follow me on Instagram at Sheldon Alexander or on Twitter at Shell Alexander. And remember to like and subscribe to the DRF Sports Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. But also, we not only got podcasts for you, but we got some free swag. So all you got to do is head to our home on Instagram at DRF Sports and enter by liking the giveaway post, following DRF Sports on Instagram, and sharing the post on your story. The winner will be announced next Wednesday, November 17th. And for more from this brand new project from DRF Sports, we're just here to let you know some more information. Because if you're not familiar with the letters DRF, Daily Racing Forum has been around for over 100 years, giving you all of the horse racing information, data, and analysis. But now we're taking over the entire sports world. So if you want coverage on every football game and also the NBA, MLB, NCAA, and more, head to drf.com/sports for all of the details and insights, as the site has all of the data on every game, including defensive stats, offensive stats, betting angles, line movements, and key injuries. The DRF data is what powers our power trends. So if you want to see which trends our analysts have selected, follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. And if you want access to all the raw data, go to drf.com/sports. That's where the usual previews go. Plus, we go in depth on this podcast. However you want your betting information, we've got you covered. My name is Sheldon Alexander. We do this twice a week on Tuesdays and on Fridays. That's all I got for now. But until next time, see ya.
Thanks for listening to the DRF Sports Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. For more sports betting advice, go to drf.com/sports and follow on Twitter at DRF_sports.